"What's up now?" sighed John, subsiding into his former position. "Is he coming?" "Ha! He's in the town by now. It's toss, I tell you. Hello, hello, here he is, here we are." But John Crow was not the only unbeliever in Glastonbury to be confronted with the inexplicable, that eventful 20th of January. The Marquis of P, making his way to the snug little lodging above the offices of the Wayfarer, where Ned Atling had his rooms, wondered to himself as he went along whether, after all, he was well advised to pay a surprise visit at 10 o'clock at night to his daughter's lover. He had dined at the Pilgrimses, where Sergeant Blimp had put up, as usual, the famous green-wheeled dog-cart, and warmed by a bottle of first-rate port, sipped in company with his old servant in the quiet room he always occupied, he had resolved to make a frontal attack upon this troubler of the Zoyland pride. "If they're not married, I don't care," he said to himself. "Sister will have to swallow it. I'm not going to quarrel with the girl for Betsy's sake." It was easier to find the place at the hour of the night than to discover how to get into Adling's room when he had found it. What a shabby down-and-out location for the mayor's official newspaper. But one of the battered doors opened easily to his hand, though there was no bell or knocker. Groping about inside a dark passage, Lord P began to feel more like a nervous burglar than like an indignant peer of the realm pursuing his daughter's seducer. "Atling! Atling!" he called out in a voice a good deal less authoritative and formidable than he would have liked it to be. There was no response, and since he had shut the street door, there was not even light enough to see whether he had to ascend the staircase or rap at some chamber in this musty passage. "Damn the young idiot!" muttered the Marquis. "Why the devil don't he keep a light in this place?" Annoyance increased the power of his voice. "Atling! Atling!" A door did open now, at the top of a straight flight of broad, bare, old-fashioned steps. A bright ray of light from inside a warm, mellow, glowing room streamed down the staircase. A girlish figure, obviously in a nightdress and dressing gown, stood in the entrance of the room. "Why, it's Dad!" cried Lady Rachel in a low, soft, rich voice. "It's Dad, Ned," she repeated, turning half round as the amazed peer, with an indrawn gasp of his breath, and muttered. "Well, I'll be damned," gravely ascended the staircase. "How sweet of you to come and see us," she cried in the same low, rich-laughing, self-composed manner. The Marquis bowed to the young woman who, in a rough tweed suit, had clearly just risen up from beside a table covered with sheets of manuscript. The room was lighted by a dim rose-shaded lamp. A pleasant fire burned in the grate, and an open door leading out of the back of the room revealed a double bed with the white sheets turned down and a second cheerful fire in a sort of alcove. "Sit down, Dad," said Lady Rachel, offering her speechless parrot a low wicker chair close to the hearth. "Get some of the cherry brandy for my father, Ned." Atling, whose hands were trembling with nervousness, lifted down from a sheaf a beautiful little decanter made of fine cut glass of a greenish tint. He spilled quite a lot of the gleaming cordial as he poured it, and it was running down the edge of the tiny glass over his own fingers as he handed it to the Marquis. Lord P declined it with a wave of his hand. "Just had a bottle of wine," he said. "Blimp ferreted it out for me. I'll have a cigarette, though, if you've got one anywhere." As he spoke, he allowed his eyes to roam over the walls of the room. They were adorned with nothing but a great number of striking watercolor sketches, all of them painted in a very peculiar and extremely unusual manner. Lord P was something of a virtuoso in this kind. and in spite of the dumbfounded condition of his nerves, he mechanically got up and approached some of the more remarkable of these pictures. "Damn good," he muttered. "Which of your children did these things?" "They're all Ned's," cried the girl eagerly. "They're lovely, aren't they?" "I should say they are." He went solemnly round the room, carefully examining each one of these singular productions. As he did so, turning his back to both of them, he thought to himself, "Bets he'd need to know anything about it. They're not married. She's sure to get tired of him after a bit. I suppose they understand about contraception." And he found himself slipping into an imaginary conversation with his friend Godfrey Bent at his club. "My daughter's picked up with an artist chap, you know, this sort of thing, down there in the country. An old family, they tell me, one of the oldest in the country, but not a brass farthing. Can't you get him a show of some sort, Godfrey, next season? They're damn good, his things. They really might make a hit if they had half a chance." When he turned round and took his place again at the fire, he regarded the young man with a very much more sympathetic eye. Lord P. was totally devoid of any poetical taste, but he really was a competent connoisseur in painting, and it pleased him to think that in all his encounters with this lad, the boy had kept this astonishing talent in the background. Rachel sat down on the arm of his father's chair, enveloping him in the warm sweetness of her glowing happiness. "Well, Dad," she said, "so you're not going to scold after all?" He looked whimsically at the fingers she had placed in his. No, there was no sign of a wedding ring. Oh, that's good. "You've not gone and got married by any chance?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm not thinking of marrying for years and years. Ned would like it. But he never teases me about it. Do you, Ned?" "Wiser not to tease him about anything, eh, lad?" chuckled her father, glancing slyly at the young man. "You understand how to keep. You mustn't be cross at an old man's grossness. From getting into trouble, as the servants say." Rachel nodded mischievously, and then smiled gravely and quietly straight into his eyes. "And what lie do you tell to your worthy Miss Crow, Rachel? I presume you still ostensibly live with her." This time the girl blushed scarlet. He had touched the sore spot, the one spot that rankled in her romantic adventures. "I tell her I have to work at night in the office," she whispered. "She sends me to bed for hours," she added ruefully, and without a smile. He changed the conversation then, asking Ned some very searing, searching technical questions about his method of painting. The talk between the three of them flagged and wilted a little after that, and he soon rose to go. "Did you hear old Johnny's speech today?" he asked, as he picked up his coat and hat and gloves. "Haven't you seen our special edition, Dad?" cried Lady Rachel, placing in the hands of the gray, elderly man, whose figure in that warmly lighted room, a room so full of a radiant atmosphere of youthful happiness, seemed to dwindle at that moment and become old and pinched and rather forlorn. A copy of The Wayfarer, with the most startling headlines that any human chronicle could conceivably carry, short of the announcement of the approaching deluge. "What's this, eh? What's this? Gad, but he couldn't have been really dead. Come now, this is getting a bit too thick. But, of course, if you wild children are going to turn this place into this, Will, I suppose this would be the kind of thing, but good God, Rachel, you don't really think yourself that my old Johnny Geared could..." And Ricky stood there in that rosy light, between the girl and her soft night attire, looking like some enamored nymph out of a Welsh fairy tale, and the sturdy young poet-painter in his Norfolk jacket, frowning and bewildered. He kept folding up the paper he held, as if to conceal the troublesome word miracle in those big black letters, and then unfolding it again. What was the world coming to? "Good night, little one," he murmured at last, kissing her tenderly. "You might send over a few of those sketches before I leave Mark Court," he added gravely. "I'll take him up to town with me." He turned to her at once more as she held the door open to light him down the staircase. "Don't you do this too often, girlie," he said. "The good Miss Crow is no fool. Besides, we don't want any confounded scandal." He was at the bottom of the stairs now. "Remember what long ears your Aunt Betsy has," he called back as he turned to go to the street door. Once in the dark street, buttoning his coat to face a frosty wind and pulling on his gray gloves, an emotion of miserable depression took hold of him. Oh, I still got a couple minutes, huh? Oh, there's only 2 more pages left, so why not? I'm going to go for it. His little Rachel! And yet how radiant the wench had looked. But oh, what a man had to see, and hear, and bear, and endure, if, in these days, he meant to keep a child's love and not make her hate him. But they're not out for marrying, he thought. That's one good thing. And she's playing safe with Crow's woman, I can see that, though she hates it like the devil. Well, who can blame her? She'll never be young again. And the lad's a decent lad. Nothing caddish or tricky about the lad. He was moving along now beside a dark row of wretched houses. The pavement wasn't even. The wind had got up and had become icy cold. It moaned and whistled over the slate roofs of the poorer portions of the town. Very old and very desolate did Henry Zoyland, Marquis of P., feel as he walked along these enchanting unconventional retreats with his little Rachel at Mark Court all over. She had been restless and distrait the last time he had her with him up there, and in those Bellamys, their quarrels with poor Blimp were becoming intolerable. Yet he hadn't the heart to turn them out. The place is nothing without her, he thought, and he saw himself sitting by that big, lonely hearth, with the ancient staircase leading up and up, and then her room, and then that stone causeway, and the Merlin room. Was it during his night in that place that old Johnny had learned those devil's tricks of putting life into dead babies? The man's desolation grew apace as he approached the outskirts of paradise. Old, I'm getting old, he thought. And no Merlin cantrips, learned by any modern Messer Belheris, could make me stir from when once I was knocked on the head. No, damn it, I won't put anything in the child's way. Let her have her fling. Zoyland women always begin with a passionate romance in their teens, and then settle down into savage harridans of 40. Betsy did it, and never married at all. The child's not half as wild as Betsy was. To hell with middle-class pruderies. The Zoylands always did what they wanted, and by Gad, my little girl shall. Thus the old diplomat swaggered in his mood, doing his best to rationalize, as they call it, his doting partiality for that glowing child in her soft night dress. But the ice-cold wind went shrieking over the roofs and wailing down the cobbled alleyways, and a feeling of bitter desolation chilled the man to the very bone. The touch of her warmth, as she sat just now on the arm of his chair, had insinuated into his veins a craving for young blood and feminine softness. That's a little weird. That's his daughter. It was for her sake he had given up that French woman in Soho, the successor of Will's German mother. For years he had lived like a monk for the child's sake, and this was his reward. And these cursed communists turning Glastonbury into a bedlam of follies, while old Johnny was working miracles. He better get back to town at once, get hold of a good lawyer. Beer was no use anymore. And make sure that those ungrateful sons of his couldn't touch a sliver of what he left to Rachel and to Will of all this new cash. He was passing Mother Legge's ambiguous domain now, and as he glanced at that familiar other house, which in younger days he had so often entered, He's talking about the whorehouse. He saw the door furtively open and a man and a woman come out. He stepped into the shadow of a bull buttress to let them pass, and he could not help recognizing them. One was Clarissa Smith, the pretty head waitress at the Pilgrims', and the other was a man he'd seen in the stables there. None other, in fact, than the converted ostler with whom the miracle worker had been drinking that very morning. What does the old woman make people like that fork out? He wondered. She must be hard-pressed these days if those are her clients. But when he emerged from his retreat, he actually found himself hesitating for the fraction of a second and imagining himself ringing that Cyprian doorbell. Cyprian doorbell. Cyprian doorbell. I suppose young Toozy's there still, he thought. Who was it told me those communists were going to give the old boy a job at the Grail Spring? From Camelot to Chalice Hill. Well, that's how the world wags. He could still see the two figures moving along in front of him, Clarissa clinging tenderly to her ostler's arm. I hope he feels the same, he said to himself. That sort of thing leaves the girl more loving, but the man, not always. By God, if that boy of Rachel's plays any games. But the sight of that waitress and ostler clinging together so happily troubled the senses of this elderly gentleman as he walked behind them. The girl had the sort of plump figure he used to like. He could see that well enough, even in this dark street. Garment by garment, he undressed the unconscious Clarissa in that ice-cold wind. He was traversing the very pavement that Red Robinson had traversed the night of the party at Mother Leg's, and precisely the same sort of soul-sick craving for a warm fire and a warm feminine body came over him as had devastated the angry proletarian. Had the ambitious Clarissa only known. But that young lady continued to cling to her ostler's arm, whispering amid her endearments, and the truth must be confessed, certain wickedly intimate structures upon the character of Mr. Thomas Barter. Strange that the guileless warmth of Rachel's romance should be driving her father on now to undress Clarissa Smith. Rachel, Clarissa, oh, how cold the wind blew, and how harsh and desolate and comfortless the world was. In the warmth of the bodies of women, in their ways, in their laughter, in their clinging, yes, even in their anger and their mockery, there's the only real refuge, he thought. Let him scold and rave, however cruel their words, their limbs are still satiny to our touch, their souls still free of our cursed laws and labors and fuss and fume. Okay. He slackened his pace, for Clarissa's arm was now round her companion's neck. He actually stopped again, while his heart, as he imagined himself returning on his steps and ringing that doorbell, began to beat within him in the way it used to do, 20, 30 years ago. But the sergeant would be sitting up for him. Besides, what was he thinking of? That other house wasn't a brothel. Okay, it's not a brothel. Young Toozy would expect... Damn it! He was just a fool. The figures in front of him had turned the corner now, and he walked rapidly on. Tommy Chinnock's I'd like to, Clarissa, ebbed quickly from the live, weary pulses of the Marquis of P. When he reached the lighted lamps of the High Street, a bare-footed boy came rushing past him, calling out a late edition of Yeovil's paper. "Miracle at Glastonbury!" the boy shouted. Lord P smiled a bitter, man-of-the-world smile. "There's only one miracle in this world," he muttered out loud, "that can make old men young, and that's not for old men who've outlived their time." Well, that's the end of that chapter. That's chapter The Saxon Arch. And now we're up to the Grail. That should be a big chapter, I'm guessing. The Grail, that's what we're here about, right? Oh yeah, there's only like 3 chapters left, because we're on page 902 now. 902. So we're getting very, very sadly close to the ending now. Not looking forward to that. But hey, still got some time left. And until next time, maybe next time I'll go over what's going on in the story as much as I can remember, which isn't that much at the beginning. Until next time, I'll see you there. See you in Glastonbury. Cheers.